right, today I'm going to show you how to do some initial carving on your first block, how to use several different tools, as well as how to get warmed up and some of the general guidelines for carving. So what you should have to begin with is your design onto your block. This is the block that I designed for this. And it should be all in black and white, so everything inked up in Sharpie is what is going to be printed. That's what I'm going to leave. And then what's in the gray is going to be carved away. Then I've got a little warm-up block here, and I've got my chisels. Now, your chisels, you should have a variety in your set. Almost all sets have, or I should say all sets, should have a small V, might even be a little bit smaller than this one. And if you look at the end there, it's in the shape of a V. You can kind of see that there. And then I have a larger V as well. And then I also have a U-gouge. And they make distinctly different marks, U-gouges versus V-gouges. And then you should also have a chisel. And we'll use all of these on this first project. A few things to know about the chisels. They're made out of hardened steel. The power grips are kind of what we think of as standard in this class. A lot of people also use the Nijis. They work really well. They're also made out of hardened steel, just not quite as hard. And they are honed and polished and have a end that will cut really well. So you can just give your chisels a feel and just feel how sharp they are. Be really careful there. And then the other thing is they have an ergonomic handle, and this is where the power grips are a little superior to the Niji, in that this fits into the palm of your hand really nicely, kind of right in that crook there. And then typically you apply pressure on the top of the chisel. And that's how most people carve. It's the safest way to carve. A few just notes about carving. So if you think of this plate from the side, so the profile, I want you to think about your cuts. So if you undercut underneath it, it will actually sometimes cause some structural issues. The lino will oftentimes eventually actually delaminate itself and pop off. That can happen, but also the pressure when you print can cause some issues in this little area, in that overhang there. So you want to avoid that. It's not uncommon to do a little bit of that on your first project. And then what's okay is just to have a straight edge. This is what's most common. I oftentimes carve this way. And then what is most desirable is just a really soft edge, so a little bit softer than a 45-degree angle. And that gives some really nice stability right in this area, so that it doesn't cause an issue with all of the pressure coming when you print. When you print on the press, there's a crazy amount of pressure onto your plate. So what I want you to first do is grab your warm-up plate and take a look at your tools. I've got the small V, the big V, and the U-gouge, and then the chisel. So for the U-gouge, just to warm up, you want to push downward a little bit. You don't have to put a ton of pressure. The sharper your tools, of course, the less pressure. And then you want to kind of gently, like a slide, you want to gently translate that into a forward pressure. And you don't have to push very hard. You can let the tool do the work. You can achieve a lot of different ends to that line with the U-gouge. You can get something kind of pointy if you do it fast. Or you can get something kind of soft if you do it slowly. or soft and rounded. And then I want you to try the V gouge. Again, you go down and forward. You go to just a little less of an angle on the slide as you translate that into a forward motion. Now, when you're applying pressure, if you're having trouble controlling it, I want you to think about how you're standing. You want to have 2 feet firmly planted on the ground. You want to have your hips square and strong, and think about your core, just like if you're doing yoga or something like that. And then you want a lot of your pressure to be coming from your shoulders. It doesn't actually come from your wrist. You will wear yourself out if you put too much of the pressure coming from your wrist. And then I want you to try the big V gouge. The big V gouge will go down deeper. It'll make a bigger mark. And I'm going to show you how to use the chisel a little bit later as we actually get into the plate. So I've warmed up now. I warm up every single time I carve. And to be honest, if I haven't carved for very long, or if I haven't carved in a long time, sometimes I'll do a practice plate. This is going to be a practice plate for me. So I did already kind of start this as a warm-up just before I started the video. But I want you to think about first what you're going to carve in what order. It's a good idea to start out here. And that is because if you make a mistake out here, you're going to be carving it all away, so it's not such a big deal. And you want to place your plate right up against the bench hook. And when you carve, you want to keep your hands out of what's called the line of fire. So you don't want to have your hand in front of where you're carving like that. That's a no-no. You always want your hand back here. And that's why the bench hook is so terrific. There are going to be times when the bench hook is awkward. You're going to have to hold it. But just keep your hands out from behind. I'm sorry. You keep your hands behind the chisel and you'll be good. The other thing that you want to make sure that you're doing is not carving on a soft surface. You always want to carve on a hard surface. Again, why I like the bench hook, because it hooks onto a table. I recommend a table. Don't ever carve on like the couch or a piece of furniture or something soft like a pillow or your bed. Not a good idea. I'm going to rotate the plate around. Now you'll notice if I go too deep, I'm being impatient. You see how that'll start to like tear out? You want to avoid that. Again, not a huge thing to try out in the area that you're going to be carving away. Do you see how sometimes it's really like smooth and then I'll kind of slip? And that's where I just get a little too deep. I want to show you how to carve this little detail here. I've got my V gouge here and I am just going down and around. So I decided for the demo to do this really stylized eyeball because it gives me lots of opportunities for different kinds of lines. And on this first project, I want you to get really comfortable with both the V and the U gouge. And then as you start to design subsequent projects, you might be thinking specifically about which gouge is going to work for you for that particular part of your design. So you have to move your plate around. And I like to work fairly systematically through my design. I don't jump all over the place. I'll do the same kind of cut and I'll repeat it several times. And that's partly because that motion, the more you do it, the more kind of adept you get at doing that. So here I'm kind of starting it with the V, and then I'm going to come back in and do the U, because I've got a little bit of a spot there. I want to show you a few more lines before the second part of the video. Curves are your hardest thing. Can also be a little difficult to stop. And then thin lines are very difficult to do on this first plate. That's why I had you do your designs in Sharpie. So as you get to the where you want your line to end, you just want to slow down a little bit and think about how your force is coming through the chisel. That's where if it's coming from your shoulder, it's a little bit better. Now, as I'm looking at this and I'm thinking about my design, I'm already regretting doing those with the U gouge. I wish that I had done them with the V gouge because they would be thinner and have just a little more energy to give a little more character to this eyeball.